Today's topic is women in tech and especially the authority gap. While we see that there are definitely a lot of unconscious bias gap, but it is slowly getting reduced.
When it comes to everyday interactions, they still suffer manifestations of the authority gap. And there is still a big gap between the amount of authority we accord to women and the amount that we accord to men.
Your statement is very powerful. Men are assumed to be competent until they are proven otherwise, but women are assumed to be incompetent until they are proven otherwise. So
if you haven't got as many women as men further up your organization, then you're not maximizing your talent pool. You're not maximizing their potential. I Googled just the two words authority definition, literally because I wanted to define my terms. I was giving a lecture about this. And every sentence that they used for a different meaning of the word authority began with the same pronoun, which of course was he.
I mean, unless you experience it, you probably may not be able to even comprehend in terms of what are the kind of effort it takes for a person, to get through that, for a women to get through some of the easy conversations which probably a man is doing.
When you even look at promotions onto the first rung of the managerial ladder, only 81 women are promoted for every 100 men.
Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Today's topic is women in tech and especially the authority gap, right? How do we see that or perceive authority gap in the tech industry? So I want to introduce our guest for today, Marianne Sieghart. She's Sieghart, yes.
Yeah.
I think, and she's a columnist and assistant editor at the Times of London. I can talk for an hour about her experience and what she's done for the last 3 decades or more than that. Happy to have you and do this conversation on the topic on your book, which I wanted to show to everybody here, the authority gap, and why women are still taken less seriously than men and what we can do about it. Very warm welcome, Marianne.
Thank you very much.
So in 21st century, so we've had more women entrepreneurs on and board members emerging, right, in all the industries, and I've seen a lot in the tech industry as well. So the gap, I feel, while we see that there are definitely a lot of unconscious bias and there is a gap, but it is slowly getting reduced. So that's one way to look at, or a perspective which is there around. So what is your take on that?
Things are definitely getting better. I wouldn't deny that things are getting better. They're a lot better than they were in the Mad Men era, say in the 1960s. There are more women in senior positions, and we are taken more seriously than we were 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. But what I try to explain in the book is that although women have been promoted more to more senior positions than they were in the past, when it comes to everyday interactions, they still suffer manifestations of the authority gap. And what that means is that we're much more likely to be underestimated, disrespected, patronized, to be interrupted or talked over, and we're much more likely to have our expertise challenged. And if we're in a position of authority, we're more likely to have that resisted. So I'm talking about authority both in terms of expertise and competence on the one side and power on the other. And there is still a big gap between the amount of authority we accord to women and the amount that we accord to men.
Yeah, I think, this book, especially, it's not just for women, but it's also for men, and all of us to read.
Very much for men.
Yeah, very much, and to read and understand the unconscious bias, which everybody carries, right? And I think your statement is very powerful. Men are assumed to be competent until they are proven otherwise, but women are assumed to be incompetent until they're proven otherwise. So that assumption, it's definitely difficult to digest that quote. But it's true. I've also seen and experienced. So being influenced by women from my personal journey, right, being my grandmother and mother and sister and my wife now, and also I've had worked under women leaders in my career a lot of times. So I know how different, I have become a person working under the influence of women in the corporate world. So I'm really thankful for getting that experience. So and learning from all of them. Do you believe in the concept of a seat at the table for women? to be representing their rights, or a seat at the table is more of an outcome if the organization has the right mindset and culture without having an authority gap and gender prejudice. Is so how an organization could start or build such culture within. So that's is one of my uh, thought which came to my mind, right? How when there are a lot of conversations around seat at the table, or and you also mentioned that it's when there is a panel just for selection, it's not one woman is needed, we should have two, so that there is no bias unconsciously which comes in when you just push a women candidate, the other people may not think that it's so. I mean, I wanted to hear your perspective.
I just think it's obvious that in any organization, and particularly a business, if half your customers or half the people you're dealing with are women, which generally they are, it seems crazy not to have a balanced number of men and women at the top taking decisions about your product or your purpose, because it's not just a question of fairness or justice. It's just that you're not actually going to be serving the interests of your consumers well. I wouldn't expect men to be able to understand I don't know, the difference between different types of tampon. Why would you? It's not part of your life, right? More women than men take decisions about which car to buy. And yet most auto companies have many more men at the top than women. So, you're not doing yourself a favor as an organization if you don't have a balance of men and women all the way through the organization. But it's also a question of the talent pool. I mean, we all know that women are just as intelligent and competent as men. So educationally, certainly in the West, I'm not sure about in India, women actually outperform men on average all the way through school and a university, right up to PhD level. You've got more women than men. So they're entering the workforce with better qualifications than men. They are just as intelligent as men. If anything, the research shows they are more hardworking, more diligent, more conscientious on average, probably because they know they have to work harder in order to be appreciated. And therefore, if women are every bit as good as men, then if you haven't got as many women as men further up your organization, then you are not maximizing your talent pool. You're not maximizing their potential.
I mean, when I read the book, especially on this was very. It was very resonating because I have a daughter and a son, so he's younger, but the daughter is elder. So this boys being instrumental and girls being ornamental. So that was a very very. I can definitely resonate because then when you actually in the last chapter about the recommendations of what are the things which we need to do as an individual or as a teacher or as a employer. So I think as a parent, so maybe I wanted to understand your perspective on that, right?
Okay, so what I'm saying is that parents need to be much more aware of how they are feeding these messages through to their children. And so when you talked about boys being instrumental and girls being ornamental, and it's not that they are, it's that it's what we praise them for.
Yeah.
So, we see a little girl and we'll say, oh, you look so pretty today, or what a pretty dress, or whatever. Whereas for a boy, we'll say, oh, wow, you're good at kicking your football. And that's something that we have to really guard against as parents. I would say that the most important thing we have to do at the very beginning is to make sure, if we're in a straight relationship, that is, that the mother and the father have equal authority at home, because that's what's going to make a sort of imprint on your children's brains. If dad looks like he's in charge at home, they're going to think men have more authority than women, right? Whereas if it's absolutely equal, and assuming that the mother works as well, if the father shows as much respect for the mother's career and her work demands as she does for his, that again is going to bring children up with the sense that men and women are equal at work as well as equal at home. But then it's also really important not to stereotype their interests, the chores that you expect them to do. Don't always assume that your daughter is going to be helping mummy with the cooking while your son is going to be, I don't know what it is you do with your son, but I don't know, tinkering with a car or going off and playing football, whatever it is. Maybe she likes football, maybe he likes cooking. And actually it's going to be jolly useful to him in life if he can cook as well. But when it comes to what the outside world is telling them, I think all you can do is very pervasive. And I think all you can really do as a parent is talk about it and point it out and say to them, if you're reading a book, how come the boys get all the fun things to do in this book and the girls just tagging along? Does that seem right to you? get them to recognize the patterns in what they're being fed in the media and question them. Because it's only once you start questioning them. There's a very good video I watched recently of a primary school class who were asked to draw pictures of, I think it was a builder, an astronaut, a firefighter, and a surgeon. And of course, both boys and girls almost uniformly drew men and gave them names. Okay. And then the teacher said, would you like to meet a firefighter and an astronaut and a surgeon and a builder? And they all said, yeah, we'd love to. And into the room, in their sort of uniforms and space helmets and surgeon's masks and everything, walk 4 women. And it's a female surgeon, a female astronaut, a female firefighter, a female construction worker. And the children's eyes were like saucers because they just didn't realize women could do these things.
Yeah, no, that's true. I think that the riddle, which everybody talks about, I think I'm not sure how many people have listened to it also, right? That the father and the son met with an accident and they've been carried to the hospital, and on the way the father dies, and then when the son reaches the hospital and the surgeon looks at him and said, hey, I can't do the surgery because he's my son. So I mean, everybody is just wondering, how is that possible? And because the natural instinct of surgeon is becoming a male, but the surgeon was his mother. So this is. I mean, I like that there are a lot of prejudice or minds. I mean, I think you also talked about the Google search for authority, more masculine. But I think I had a question on that, right, which is really disturbing. So even today. I just did again multiple types of Google search, and you also talked about the presidential elections and between the difference between the Hillary Clinton and the probably ambition versus Obama or Biden. So there is a lot of association.
Shall I just explain what that was? So I Googled Hillary Clinton ambition and Joe Biden ambition. Yeah. And for Joe Biden, they came up with his ambitious climate change investments. And I can't remember what the other one was, his ambitious immigration bill or something. Whereas for Hillary Clinton, it was the pathologically ambitious Hillary Clinton and the curse of Hillary Clinton's ambition. It just shows that when you associate ambition with a woman, it's perceived as incredibly negative. And with a man, it's something to be proud of. It was just to illustrate the double standards. And when it came to Googling, I Googled just the 2 words authority definition, literally because I wanted to define my terms. I was giving a lecture about this. And every sentence that they used for a different meaning of the word authority began with the same pronoun, which of course was he. So there was, he had the natural authority of one who is used to being obeyed, and he hit the bull with authority, and he was an authority on the stock market. And I thought, well, hang on, didn't Margaret Thatcher or Indira Gandhi have the natural authority of one who is used to being obeyed? And doesn't Serena Williams hit the bull with authority? I wasn't even looking for this. I was just looking for a definition, but sometimes your subject just comes up and sort of slaps you in the face. It is amazing, isn't it? Because so I wrote this book. It came out in 2021, but I think I did that Google search when I was writing in 2019. So, and so it's been published, and this is now 6 years on, and still no one's changed it. Well, I think part of the problem, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are many, many, many more men in tech than there are women. And I just don't think men care enough about this problem. Man, I keep saying I want men to join this conversation because it is actually important for the whole of humankind, not just for women. And men can actually gain from closing the authority gap. It's not a zero-sum game. And yet most men, not all, but most men are just simply not interested. They don't see the problem, and so they don't do anything about it.
And I think your word, the techno-chauvinism. So I was really taken aback. This was like long back in 80s when I think the Google's parent company you talked about where she worked and how it was prevalent that time. So I think it's still. I think when I have been looking at even hiring people for senior roles as well as for even a junior developer, I mean any developer roles, as equally. You get resumes. The 10:1 is always a 10 male candidates resume you get versus just one. But I used to keep asking the talent acquisition, hey, is it like the scarcity in the market, or is it not they're applying, or you don't get it? So it's probably the natural tendency of them going towards technology is low. Or what is your observation on the STEM right side?
Yeah, I mean, it depends which type of STEM. So you've got pretty much parity in biology. I think it depends which country, obviously. I know mainly about the UK and the US, but I think you've got nearly 50% women studying biology, chemistry, psychology. You've got a majority of women. But when it comes to maths, physics, and computer science in particular, you've got many more men than women. And this is not, I think, because of aptitude, nor indeed necessarily because of interest. So there was a very interesting study done asking young women in America why they chose not to major in computer science at college. And they said it wasn't because they thought it was too difficult. It wasn't because they weren't interested in it. It was because they were overwhelmingly worried about the gender bias that they would confront if they did it. There is a lot of gender bias in those courses at university. I think it's really hard to be a young woman studying computer science with young men. So I'm afraid here it's the way the men behave.
Yeah, it's sad to hear. And while we talk about gender equality and inclusiveness, and that's more of an initiative across all the organizations. But beyond that, these are still prevalent problems across across different countries, not just in the developed, but even I just sent you the research which I was looking at, because your examples are more on the spectrum of UK. I mean, at least a lot of people and the scholars you've talked to on in America and British and India. I just did again a search similar to that. In academia, your examples with Rough Garden and the other side of the view, right? How somebody who has been a man and then transitioned to women, or women and transitioned to men. So that's a very compelling research which you've done. And I did the research. I tried to read through the article, what are the things available and how is it in India. I don't see any difference. I sent you that link too.
Yeah, I had a look. And this is representation of women in academia, and also representation of women invited to speak at academic conferences. And they're not invited in the proportionate numbers for to which they exist in those disciplines. They just, it's an authority gap. Their views are not valued as much as men's views, and a lot of them leave academia because of the way they're treated. That's what the academic article said. And actually, the authors of the article had done some research on Twitter, or X as we're supposed to call it now, and they said that the comments they got back from men were really unpleasant, sort of belittling, aggressive, attacking them simply for doing this research. So it makes you realize how inhospitable the climate must be for female academics.
Yeah, with the Twitter, when you talked about, I think the shut your own mouth, that you have given the examples of what somebody has received in the Twitter. I mean, it's very common. I mean, the social media platform has become more of anybody can talk anything without having a face. So it's become such a and especially against women, I see a lot. But that's I think the book has all that in the way it is written, and you have a specific example which you said, when you had to you got what you've got as a example. I think I'm reading on the first paragraph of that chapter, right? So you started to mention you went to it's on International Women's Day conference and you didn't see anybody in the panel, and then it says, what is it?
It was all men, all men. Two panels in a row that were all men on International Women's Day.
Yeah. So it's
and all I tweeted was really it was an economists panel. There are lots of female economists, and I said, really, couldn't they have found one woman economist on International Women's Day of all days? And a man replied to me on Twitter saying, if that Sieghart woman was my wife, I'd abuse her. I mean, in other words, he'd beat me up for simply pointing out there wasn't a woman on a panel. It's so disproportionate, the abuse that you get online.
There are a lot of interesting examples which you have said. I would recommend everybody to start read that and understand. I think the female founders, of which she invented a co-founder, Keith Mann, to actually start communicating with the clients to get better negotiations, right? So that's it's how much they have to think out of the box to solve this, or try to get around this problem, which is really, really disturbing.
And I gave another example of a male and a female colleague who switched email addresses for a week.
Yes.
So it happened by mistake. He logged on not realizing that he was sending emails under her email address. And he couldn't understand why the clients were being so slow to come back to him, so disrespectful of what he wrote, all this sort of thing. And when he realized what it was, she said to him, but I've been complaining about this for years. It's really hard to get these clients to take me seriously. And so they then swapped email addresses, I think, for 2 weeks.
For 2 weeks.
Started to understand. For her, it was fantastic. At last, people were actually responding properly, believing what she said. They stopped challenging her, all that sort of thing. And it was marvelous. And for him, he understood for the first time what it was like to have a female name, basically.
I mean, unless you experience it, right, you probably may not be able to even comprehend in terms of what are the kind of effort it takes for a person, I mean, to get through that, for a woman to get through some of the easy conversations, which probably a man is doing it, right?
Yeah. I think the most interesting thing, which you alluded to earlier, it's very hard to prove the existence of the authority gap in any particular scenario, because suppose you are a woman and you're up for a job or a promotion against a male rival and he gets it and you don't. You may suspect that the authority gap was at play, the bias was at play, but it's really hard to prove because you're different people, right? He might genuinely be better than you.
Yeah.
But I tell a story in the book of two Stanford science professors who happened to transition to the opposite gender at the same time. They used to meet up for lunch and compare notes. And Ben Barres, who was a neuroscientist, said once he started living as a man, he said, I've had the thought 1,000,000 times, I'm taken more seriously now. He said, my work is taken more seriously. The same damned work, as he put it, is taken more seriously now that people see me as a man. And he told the story of an academic who was overheard after one of his seminars, who didn't know his history, saying, oh, Ben Barres gave a great seminar today. But then his work,
better than his
sisters, i.e. his own. And this is the point. If you talk to people who've lived as both a man and a woman, you don't have the problem that I talked about earlier of it being two different people and maybe the male rival is better, because it's the same person and they've got the same intelligence and personality, experience, all this sort of thing. And therefore, if they're being treated quite differently after they transition, it must be because of their gender. You've controlled for all the other variables and isolated the only relevant one, which is whether people see them as a man or a woman. And the professor who transitioned in the other direction, of course, had exactly the opposite experience. Joan Roughgarden, she's an evolutionary biologist. She said when she was still living as a man, life was great. She felt like she was on this conveyor belt to success. She kept getting promoted. Her pay kept going up. She was asked to sit on all these prestigious committees. It was really easy to get research grants. And once she started living as a woman, all that fell away. And her conclusion was very similar to mine, that men are assumed to be competent until they prove otherwise. Women are assumed to be incompetent until they prove otherwise. So that's why I'm saying that it's hard for men to understand until they inadvertently use a female email address, or indeed they transition and they realize what it's actually like.
And I think the other question I have is on the, it's not a zero-sum game. So which is definitely, I would encourage every viewer and probably every man to read about it and understand it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like, you win, I lose. Right. So I think the way you've put together is very thorough and definitely, it strikes a chord with everybody. I mean, when you read it, right. So, I mean, especially it is a very powerful chapter. Gender equality is, in every aspect of your life will make you happier, healthier, and more satisfied, and not really, the other way around. So, what's your view on that?
That's for men, by the way. This is for men. So women obviously are happier and healthier and more satisfied, as are the children, but the men themselves are. And it's so powerful. There's a load of academic research showing this, that both in more gender equal countries and in more gender equal straight relationships, in which the man and the woman share the chores pretty equally and the childcare pretty equally, men are twice as likely to say that they're satisfied with their lives. Twice as likely. It's a big difference. Less than half as likely to be depressed. They are much less likely to get divorced. They tend to drink less, smoke less, take fewer drugs, get better sleep at night. And here's the absolute clincher: they get more frequent and better sex. So frankly, this is really in men's interest too. And you see these huge discrepancies in promotion between men and women from a very early age. So when you even look at promotions onto the first rung of the managerial ladder, this is in America, but I think it's probably true in most countries. only 81 women are promoted for every 100 men. And that's in their 20s, right? When women are actually entering the workforce with better qualifications on average. And the reason these men are getting promoted faster is partly because they're given these micro boosts from their managers, and partly because there is just this affinity bias that male managers, and there are more men, are more likely to choose to promote or to see potential, and I'm putting it in air quotes because potential is very subjective compared with achievement, to see potential in younger men. And these are very, very easy things to change. So if you're a manager, next time you're deciding who on your team you're going to give an opportunity to, deliberately choose a woman instead of a man.
My question is it, I mean, you also mentioned about, I believe, the way the Prime Minister's wife was treated when she was a lawyer, but earlier successful. But then when she became the second lady, there was a lot of expectation in terms of how she looks, where she went. There was a lot of media coverage, but that was. Do you think is it the media which is presenting more from, or from the movies, and the way the objectification of women has happened over a long time, and the expectation is always to look pristine, or is it more of a pressure which women has put themselves, because as you also mentioned that the expectation of being pleasant and the way likable, those are something which the traits which women have to take forward to see they are listened to.
Yeah, I mean, women are judged much, much more by their looks than men are, and particularly young women. And the trouble, so there are two problems. One is that we have this bizarre notion that if a woman is very beautiful, she can't be very intelligent. The two can't go hand in hand. Whereas we have no problem assuming that George Clooney, say, is bright. But we do have a problem with women. And then the second problem is that if women are attractive, then men find it terribly hard to take them seriously as a professional, because all they can do is think about how much they fancy them. So that's a problem. It's also a problem then if women are not attractive, because men just aren't really interested in them. Not all men, of course. I'm just talking about men on average. Men don't really want to sort of hang out with an ugly woman, or they're not interested in her views because they've sort of discounted her. So women's looks really get in the way of how seriously they're taken, whether they're too beautiful or not beautiful enough. Whereas for men, you can pretty much look like anything. You can be almost any age. They're just, we don't have nearly as many demands on men, or nearly as many constraints on men. It's just so much easier for men.
I think what my assumption, or probably what I've observed, that's more driven from the media, not just media, the entertainment industry. So that's more commoditized, the way women have to look. So maybe that's been applied to all the women across the globe, irrespective of where they come from. The domain is different, but then I believe that's from the entertainment industry, who is driven.
Yeah, but men aren't expected to look like movie stars. So why are women?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Yeah, no, I think that's a valid point.
I mean, I think movies are improving a bit, slowly, but a bit. And so it used to be the case that women were only really there as either sex objects or helpmeets or murder victims. But I would say in the last 5 or 10 years, we started to see many more, certainly American and British perhaps, movies in which women actually have interesting roles to play, and not just because they're beautiful or because they're murder victims. So very slow. It is very slow, but we are getting more. We're getting better role models in movies than we had in the past, but still not nearly enough. And not nearly enough films are directed by women in the first place. I think it's still only about 10%.
Even on the senior, even if accomplished people, like Liz Truss was a good example you brought in, and then also the Australian Prime Minister
Julia Gillard.
Yeah. Gillard. So, I mean, the way what has gone, what they have experienced is definitely beyond words to explain. And I mean, probably when you have done the interviews, it takes a lot of effort and guts to actually understand their empathize with what they've gone through, and then try to bring that out in the book. But it's really disturbing when somebody experiences like that, and even at that level, right? But I mean, how is even I don't think so it has changed. Even to 2024, we've seen the election the US election, how it went, and you've seen there's no change from what you've done, interviewed Hillary Clinton to now Kamala Harris. So I don't know.
If anything, it's got worse, I would say, in America.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine? We have a US president who is demanding that Romania drop charges against Andrew Tate for rape and assault and sex trafficking. He's actually siding with an alleged rapist. And, he was very keen to get, both the sort of bro culture from tech on side, Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, but also appealing to, the cage fighters, men who like the idea of cage fighting. I mean, he is trying to appeal, or has managed to appeal, to the most extreme form of toxic masculinity.
You are the best person in talking about the politics. I mean, across from your columns. I think it's. I know the book has opened a can of worms, but then also it has given a lot of opportunities for us to think in any organization, in any domain, in terms of what are the unconscious bias and how do we constantly put effort to actually get over it as a man, as a women. I mean, you also mentioned a lot of times we associate authority with low voices, yeah. But then when something is high, then probably we trying to not listen to them. So I mean, there are good examples. I think everybody should read the book Authority Gap to get an awareness, right? Not just that we would be able to have a magic wand to change things around just tomorrow, but at least you can make small steps to actually help and enable to reduce the authority gap.
So yeah, it can really be done, and it can be done quite quickly, quite easily, and quite painlessly without men suffering. And it is just a question of increasing your awareness of it. And I've had a lot of men say to me, I had no idea about this before until I read your book, and now I see it everywhere. And now I've started changing the way I behave. And as I say, it doesn't cost them anything, but it really brings benefit to their female colleagues, to the women to whom they're married, whoever it is, and then the men actually benefit from having a much better relationship with their female colleagues, with their partner, with their daughters, if they're female bosses, if they've got one, because once they start treating them with equal respect, the women really notice and really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for doing this. And thank you for all the wisdom and knowledge which I've gained through this conversation.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's been really interesting.
Hello, everyone. If you like this conversation, please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button for latest updates in my show, Caffelogue with Naga. Thank you so much.